Hey guys, today we're in the book of Numbers, chapter 35. So we ended off yesterday with the boundaries of the promised land. And today, God tells them what to do within those boundaries of the promised land. And the whole chapter is talking about what we will come to know as the Levitical cities and also the cities of refuge. They're both Levitical cities, but the cities of refuge have an extra meaning to them, and that's kind of what we'll get into. For those of you at Green Acres, we talked a lot about this back in the book of Joshua, Joshua chapter 21. It even goes into more details about the Levitical cities and the refuge cities. So if you're interested in this chapter, you want to skip ahead to Joshua 21. And it might answer some questions for you. But we see here that God tells them that they're going to have certain cities for the Levites because, as we know, the Levites will not get inherited land, right? Every tribe gets inherited land except for the Levites. They will own no land and no pasture land. And so what God does is he sets up these cities throughout all the promised land and beyond the river, beyond the promised land, on the eastern side of the Jordan, that the priests and the Levites might live in, so they would be spread all around Israel. So not everybody's going to one particular place to sacrifice, but it was close and common and easier to get to. So we see in verse 2 that there is no inherited land. Then we see in verse 4 we get some measurements. It's kind of weird to measure, but with 1,000 cubits all around, and then on the east side, the south side, and the north side, they shall have 2,000 cubits. So basically, on one side of the city, outside of the walls, there would be about, we would say, 1,750 feet. So think in your mind a quarter mile. On the other three sides, there are 3,500 feet, which is about a little over a half a mile, right? So they have the city within the walls, but then there's also pasture land on the outside so that they can have animals and eat as well. We learn in verse 6 that there's going to be 6 cities of refuge, and there's going to be 42 other cities, making a total of 48 Levitical cities. And so, once again, they're going to be, it says, in proportion to the inheritance in verse 8, which means they're going to be evenly distributed on both sides of the Jordan, starting from the north, working all the way down. They're kind of everywhere. The cities of refuge, there's 3 on the west side of the Jordan. There's 3 on the east side of the Jordan, 2 in the north, 2 in the middle, 2 in the south. And so God is just evenly distributing not only the Levites, but also these cities of refuge. Now, what are these cities of refuge about? We get to that, verse 9. Basically, a city of refuge are 6 particular cities that were Levitical cities. They were just a normal city for the Levites. Everything was happening, but there was a special place for these Levitical cities. And what happened was, if you were to accidentally kill someone. Now remember, we have learned, as we have read, that justice is important to God. And we have read that if somebody kills somebody, then it is right to return the favor. It is right to bring that man to justice. And so if somebody kills somebody accidentally, well, they don't know if it was accidentally or not. So their family would try to avenge or to bring righteousness by going after the murderer and killing him. And so God set these 6 cities, 2 in the north, 2 in the middle, 2 in the south, that if you were to kill somebody, you could flee to these cities. And if you were within the limits of this refuge city, you were safe. Now, it doesn't mean that you automatically were safe, but you would come to the city, and it talks about that you would have to sit in a courtroom, verse 12, that there would be a judgment. And so basically you would go in and you would tell your story. Maybe even those who were chasing you to avenge the blood would be chasing you. And there would be, like in our mind today, a courtroom scene. And the chief elders at the gate would be sitting there, and these priests would weigh into it and say they are guilty or not guilty. This chapter says if they were guilty, they instantly should be killed right then, right there, right? Because they killed with intent to hurt that person. But if they did accidentally kill someone and they can prove it and explain it, then they would have to live within that city for the rest of their life. And so as long as they were within the limits of that city, they were safe. But the moment they step outside of that city limit, right, not just the walls of the city, but that 1,000 cubits on the west side, the 2,000 cubits on the other northeast and west side, if they stepped right over it, somebody could kill them and it would be okay. So if you accidentally killed somebody, you could run to the city and you would live, but you had to live in that Levitical city. You became a servant to the priest and you would help, but you would be alive. You would not die. But if you did purposely kill somebody and you ran to that city and the court, the elders found you guilty, they would kill you on the spot. And so we'll find out more about these cities in the book of Deuteronomy, but it's interesting that they have major highways leading to these cities. And it talks about they keep these roads kept very well. There are bridges on all the roads to the city, so there was no hindrance to get to these cities. These cities were cities of salvation. Okay, they were a place that they could hide in and be rescued. Now, what's interesting about these chapters, it goes in and it talks about how do you know if somebody is guilty or not guilty. And we see if they have hatred, if they did it purposely, if they did it in anger, or they didn't, right? So not only does he create the cities, but he gives them rules and regulations, kind of ideas to follow to help understand if somebody was guilty or not guilty. Now, I said they would stay in these cities for the rest of their life. Sometimes that was true, sometimes that was not true. On the year that the high priest died, okay, remember, Israel only has one high priest at a time. And he would be high priest all the way until he died, and then there would be somebody else in the line of Aaron would take the high priest. And so you would live inside this city of refuge, this Levitical city. You would live in there for your whole life unless the high priest died. If the high priest died while you were in the Levitical city, the city of refuge, then your slate has been wiped clean. You are no longer guilty. And basically all those people inside those refuge cities would clear out. They would go back home, right? And I would imagine they had letters or certificates that said, here's why I'm clean, because remember, if they're outside of the boundary, they could be killed. And so I'd imagine for the rest of their life, they had to carry a certificate, a scroll, something to show that the high priest died, therefore my sins have been washed free, washed clean, right? And now I can return back home. I can go back to my normal life. And so when we talk about these refuge cities, it's hard not to see Jesus, right? That there are people, whether they meant to or not, they're sinners. And they run to this city. They're being chased by death, but they get to this city, and what happens? They're saved by a priest. And they're shown that they are not guilty as long as they live in this city. But when the high priest dies, his death is a sacrifice, and his death, his blood, purifies all those who have come to the city for salvation. and then allows them to go and to live their life in grace and mercy and thankfulness. It's exactly what Jesus did for us. We run to Jesus knowing that death is chasing us, but we know that we are sinners. But as we live in grace and mercy, as we live with Christ, we are guilty. But through His blood, through His death, we are washed clean, and we are allowed to return and to live into grace and mercy and thankfulness. And so we have here an Old Testament picture of what the Messiah will do on the cross for every single one of us. So I hope that makes a little bit more sense, and we will see you tomorrow in chapter 36. God bless.